Okay, so I'm at the general location where the last major offensive took place here at the Battle of Gettysburg. I'll show you a quick view of the area. Okay, so July 2nd, 1863, General Lee's army is attacking all the way from Culp's Hill all the way down to Little Round Top. He is desperately trying to break through this Union line here. But as the fighting continues, a lot of the Union soldiers from this area are being repositioned to help strengthen the line. And later on, General Lee discovers that a lot of the Union soldiers had been sent to different locations. So by July 3rd, he has his eyes focused all on this area, and he believes that this is the weak spot, and this is where he needs to send his soldiers in to breach this line and to win the battle. So earlier that day, General Lee is talking with General Longstreet, who he referred to as his trusty warhorse, and he's giving him all the details, what he wants done. He wants everything to focus here on this line. And as you know, he gives him all the details, what he wants. And later on, or shortly afterwards, General Longstreet looks at General Lee and basically says, "Sir, I believe this attack will fail. It's more than a mile's march. When our boys come out of the tree line, they'll be exposed to Yankee artillery. The enemy has control of the high ground." He was just basically stating the obvious here. But General Lee truly believes that his men will be able to breach this line. So, at 1300 hours, right where those tree lines are at, 160 Confederate cannons started to fire onto this location. Naturally, Union guns are also firing back. Now, General Lee kind of was trying to time this out. He suspected, or he kind of believed, that this bombardment would go on for no more than 30 minutes. It went on for almost 2 hours. And as this is going on, there are towns like 30 or 40 miles away. They can hear they can hear everything that's going on down here. They know something big is happening here. And on top of that, as these cannons are firing, there's like little to no wind. So there's just a big cloud of smoke right in front of you. And when you got something obstructing your view, your accuracy is not going to be that terrific. So at some given point, some of these cannons on both ends were starting to overshoot. They were shooting way past the target line. In fact, Confederate artillery was shooting so far back, way back over here, that General Meade had to reposition his headquarters. It's just how far back they were shooting. But after almost 2 hours went by, eventually the Union guns started to slow down, and eventually they stopped. So naturally, on the other side, you got Confederate artillery thinking, okay, we probably did our job. We probably knocked out some of the guns, or they exhausted their ammo. But either way, they're not firing back. So as the cloud of smoke starts to die down, Union forces are looking clear across this field, and out from where that tree line is, 15,000 Confederate forces are forming right outside those tree lines. And this formation is stretching like almost a mile. And for a Union soldier or infantryman, you're looking at this and thinking, oh, this is just not good. But if you're if you are a Union artilleryman, you kind of have a small smirk on your face. The thing here is that a lot of these Union artillerymen, they've been firing cannons since the beginning of the Civil War. They know what they're doing. And when they see this thick formation form out in front of them, they're thinking, okay, this is going to be easy. I know how to aim this cannon. I know how to give good judgment in distance and aiming. And some of these cannons are capable of firing 2 miles out. This formation is only just a little over a mile out, so this is not going to be a challenge by any stretch of the imaginary for them. So they're getting the cannons ready, but of course they don't fire just yet because they're so close to that tree line, and they know if they start to open fire, they'll just retreat back, and it'll just be another artillery bombardment all over again. So as they're sitting there waiting, all the Confederates are in formation and they're ready to advance forward. And this is what is going to be known as Pickett's Charge, because a lot of these men, thousands of these men, belong to General Pickett. A lot of them are from his division. So at 1,500 hours, 15,000 Confederate forces are starting to march to this position. And when they get about a quarter of a mile in, Union cannons start to fire at them, and they're blowing these guys up by the hundreds. And during the Civil War, there were many different kinds of projectiles that were shot out of cannons, for which I'm somewhat familiar with. I mean, the first one obviously is the cannonball. You shoot it, it hits the ground, it explodes, kills anybody around it. The second one is the flak. Basically, it looked like a cannonball, but it's filled with gunpowder, and you would insert a fuse into it, and basically what you did, once you had it in the cannon, you had some of that fuse sticking out, so when you shot the cannon, the blast would ignite the fuse, and one or two things would happen, depending on how much fuse you put in there. It would fly through the atmosphere. Essentially, you had a ticking time bomb, and it would either explode in midair, and you would have hundreds of sharp, hot shrapnel hitting enemy combatants below it, or it would hit the ground, then explode. But either way, you're still gonna have shrapnel shooting all over the place. Then you had the canister shot, which basically was a 2-foot long container. It held about 50, maybe anywhere between like 50 to 100 musket-sized bullets, and it would essentially turn a cannon into a giant shotgun. With just one blast, I can take out 100 enemy combatants advancing towards me. And the fourth one, I don't know if it was actually used on this battlefield, but it kind of worked in the sense of a bowling ball. You know how you just take the bowling ball, you throw it down the lane, hits the bowling pins and knocks them down? That's how this projectile worked. You would shoot it, and even if it hit the ground, it didn't sink into the ground, it didn't cause an explosion. When it would just bounce, believe it or not. It would actually bounce off the ground and would still continue to roll forward until it would hit some enemy combatant that was marching up towards you, and it would take them down like bowling pins at a bowling alley. But at any rate, so as these men are marching forward up to this wall, they're just being blown away by Union artillery. And there are plenty of generals leading this attack. I mean, you got General Pettigrew, General Trimble, and General Anderson. But those three men, or those three generals, survived this attack. I don't know what they were doing or where they were located, but they lived. But there are other three generals, General Garnett, General Kemper, and General Armistead. And those three are advancing up towards this wall with their men. So as the Confederate army is advancing towards this location, again, I'm going to show you this. You can probably see a fence line. Now, I don't think that's actually the fence line. In fact, if you look past that fence line, you can just barely see another one. I don't know if you were able to see that, but here, actually, let me see if I can get it with my phone here real quick. Okay, so you see where that car is. Right next to it is a fence, but if you just look right past that fence, right where those crops are at, there's another wooden fence line there. But at any rate, some of you are probably thinking, well, for an army of 15,000, is that really going to make a difference? In this type of warfare, yes. Unlike World War I or World War II, where as soon as you step foot onto the battleground or to the battlefield, you're dashing forward, you're heading towards the enemy with or without your squad leader, or even without certain members of your squad. You're just going forward no matter what. In this type of warfare, it was all formation based. For an operation like this, to send a huge number of Confederate soldiers, it was all done in formations where you're side by side and you're marching towards your destination. So as you get to that fence, you gotta stop and climb over it, and at the same time you're helping some of your other comrades. You're trying to help them get over that fence. You're taking their rifles, you're helping them get over, and at the same time you're still being shot at by cannons. And eventually the cannons swapped over from shooting shooting solid cannonballs to canister shots. So yeah, they're now killing them by the hundreds and thousands at this point. And at the same time, that distance is actually perfect for a rifleman. So as cannons are starting to reload, Union infantry is starting to get up from their prone positions, and they're quickly standing up, they're taking aim, and they're firing onto the oncoming Confederate forces. The death toll at this point is really starting to skyrocket. Even though Confederate forces are firing back, but when you're going up against cannon and infantrymen, you're really not going to inflict much damage onto them as they are onto you. So at this point, they're actually starting to get really close now. They're finally almost getting to their destination. As they're getting close, General Kemper, he's riding along his men. He's leading them, he's instructing them what to do, when somewhere along the line he's hit in the torso and he falls off his horse, and eventually he's carried back to Seminary Ridge by some of his own men. As for General Garnett, he had a slight leg injury, so he was actually going to ride this whole thing out on horseback. And as Union forces start to fall apart around here, he is like yelling out forward to the wall, and he's galloping at full speed. And this is where the story gets a little unsure. Some say that he charged right in front of a cannon that possibly fired a canister shot at him. Others say he was gunned down by a rifleman. But either way, he's killed before he makes it to the wall. At this point, now you only have one general left, General Armistead, and he's bringing up the rear of the Confederate forces. As he gets past this fence line, he's still going forward, but as he does, he notices a lot of his men are kind of shell-shocked. I mean, they've just been traveling from just a little over, well, I should say less than a mile. They've been being blown up by Union artillery, not to mention the fact as they're advancing, they're probably seeing some of their fellow soldiers laying dead on the ground or severely wounded, no doubt probably reaching out to them, begging for help. But what can you do? You got to go forward. You have no time to stop to help these poor guys. That may not sound like a lot, but that can do a lot to a soldier's mind. So as he's looking around, he takes his hat. General Armstrong takes his hat, puts it on the tip of his sword, and yells out, "With me! Who will come with me?" And he's dashing across this field here. Not exactly how close he was to the wall, but either way, he's running up to the wall. And a lot of his men who see this are inspired by it, so they're running behind him. They're running with him. And even though Union infantrymen are quickly trying to fire into this advancing formation of Confederate soldiers, they can't seem to repel them, and they have little to no choice but to start falling back. And as they start to fall back, General Armstrong is finally standing on the wall, and he's yelling out, "Come on, boys, let's give them the cold steel," which refers to their bayonet. And from that stone wall, he's running further into Union lines. He's going into Union territory. He's past the defense line now. Now he's leading his men over that stone wall and further into Union formations. But when he gets to this spot right here, this spot right here is where eventually he is shot and he's mortally wounded. It reads, Brigadier General Lewis A. Armstrong fell here July 3rd, 1863. But despite of losing the last Confederate general that's basically on this battlefield, there's still like 400 or 500 Confederate soldiers, his Virginians, who are still inspired by what he just did and are charging over this wall. This is where hand-to-hand combat begins. As Confederate and Union forces are starting to engage, they would shoot at one another. If they couldn't shoot, they used the bayonet at the end of their rifle. If they didn't have their bayonet at the end of their rifle, they would just use their rifle as a club, bashing in skulls. If they somehow lost control of their rifle, they would quickly pull out a knife or pull out their bayonet and use it as a knife. Or if it really came down to it, you're using your bare hands. You would get into a fist fight with somebody, knock him on the ground, but without stopping, you jump on top of him with your hands around his neck and you're strangling him to death. This is anything but a fair fight. This is a ferocious fight. A fight for survival at this point. So yeah, you got about 400, maybe 500 Confederate soldiers going over this wall, going hand-to-hand combat with Union soldiers. And you still have thousands of other Confederate soldiers trying to make their way up here, but as they're advancing towards the stone wall here, they quickly notice that there are Union reinforcements coming in. They're forming up a formation, they're firing into the oncoming Confederate soldiers, and then they charge into the fight themselves. And they're overwhelming Confederate soldiers that are fighting on this side. If you are a Confederate soldier and you make it past this stone wall, eventually you were either captured or you were dead, one of the two. If you were a Confederate soldier and you're still out in the field here, you're quickly looking at the situation. You can see that Union reinforcements is coming in, and they're shooting into the oncoming Confederate soldiers that are still trying to make their way up here. and any Confederate soldiers that's on this side of the wall is just being overwhelmed. So as you're on the other side, you're looking at this and you're thinking to yourself, we can't breach the line. The Union soldiers had just now been reinforced. We just can't do it. So with not much of an alternative left, at around 1550, I want to say you have at this point an average of 6,000 or less of Confederate soldiers out on this field. From 1500 up to 1550, in less than an hour, the remaining Confederate forces are retreating back to Seminary Ridge. So as they're retreating, General Lee, he can quite clearly see that his men are falling back. He doesn't really know how many men he's lost at this point. So he's trying to rally up some troops here. I don't know exactly what he was going to do, but he eventually sees General Pickett and says to him, General Pickett, you must look forth to your division. And for the first part, he kind of pauses for a second, looks at his commanding officer, and says, General Lee, I have no division. With that being said, General Lee knows that at this point, not only has he just lost the last fight, he has lost the battle entirely. The next following day, on July 4th, General Lee is setting up a defense line. He believes that General Meade is going to attack him the next day, but General Meade doesn't. Now, even though General Lee still has thousands upon thousands of men, but of course, at the time, he couldn't afford to take his men from other positions to make another advancement, because then he would be leaving areas open for Union forces to take advantage of and possibly flank him. So he just knows now he has no one left to send in for any more attacks. He just basically accepts the nature of the situation he has lost. So later on July 4th, towards the evening of July 4th, he's rallying up what's left of his men, alive, or whether they're wounded or not. He's taking whatever he can, and he's retreating back to Virginia. Another thing I should mention is that on July 4th, another Union victory also took place at Vicksburg. Vicksburg surrendered to the Union forces, and basically that meant that the Confederates had lost control of the Mississippi River, and there were about 2 or 3 southern states that now got divided. In 1863, things were not looking good for Confederate forces. In fact, it was the year that was considered to be the turning point against the Confederacy. And as for General Armistead, he's taken captive, but he dies about 2 days later after the battle. But moving on. Despite of the devastating defeat that General Lee just suffered, along with Vicksburg, the morale in the Confederate Army was still high. Despite of the 2 major defeats they just suffered, they were still very optimistic that they can still win this war. And for 2 more years, the Confederates and the Union forces continued to fight on until 1865, when the war ended and the Union Army was victorious. basically sums it up. I just wanted to share all that with you. I hope you enjoy that. Well, give you one last view of the area. At any rate, I hope you all enjoy that. And until next time, stay in touch.